Hello and welcome to Handmade for Me. I'm Roz. Join me today sewing the tripping tote bag. This pattern is available on my website and my Etsy store. The links are below in the comments. This is a beginner friendly pattern. There are sections you can leave out, like just make it with the carry handles. Don't make the adjustable shoulder strap. Use webbing. You don't have to make the carry handles. You don't have to put the zippered pocket in. You can leave that out and make your first one with just the slip pocket, or do all of it and learn as you go. There are photos inside the pattern, and obviously this video takes you through and we can sew together. So let's get cracking. Okay, so let's make sure we've got everything we need to start with. I've got the top of the bag, top panel. I've got two main panel pieces and I have two base pieces. I also have my pocket. So this is the slip pocket, and I have the zippered pocket. And they're sitting on the main lining pieces, two lining pieces. The other thing I've got sitting here rolled up is another two pieces of interfacing, which we will be putting on when we stitch the outer pieces. We'll fuse the interfacing on after those three panels are stitched together. Now the other things that you need to have are two carry straps, so those are the hand straps. Then I've also got my shoulder strap, so this will be fitted to the side to come round in the adjustable buckle, and the two rings for the strap anchors. Then I have my zip. This is too long, so I will be trimming this. I have my zip for my zippered pocket. I appreciate that you may not want to make the slip pocket, or you may not want to make the zippered pocket. If you don't want to do that, just skip those sections. Let's start with the strap anchors first. So about 1/2 centimetre, 1/8 of an inch. Not much, just enough to tuck that raw end in. So literally just a seam, standard stitch length. Then what we're going to do is turn that round, fold it in half. I'll just line it up with that big line there because it makes it easier. Bring that in, bring the top in to the halfway as well. Match those side edges and fold it over. And I'll just clip again, because what I'm going to do is stitch on a 1/2 centimetre, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance down the sides there. So there we go, stitched with about a 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. Now I can just choose which side I think is going to be a nicer outside. I think I'm going to go that way. Just get my buckles, slide it through. Now if you put them together like that, those bottom seams can be quite thick. If that's going to be too thick for your machine, slide it back up so that that bottom seam is there and the second seam is just sitting above it. And that just means that that will make it a little bit less thick as you stitch it together and you stitch it on. Now in the pattern I say stitch a basting stitch. A basting stitch would technically be something you can pull out later, so you don't have to do it as a basting stitch. Back stitch at the beginning and end of the sewing. Those two pieces are done. Fold this in half on the longest length. Bring that back up to the halfway line. Do the same with the other side. And then what we're going to do is fold that over. Now, the fabric I'm using here is a cotton canvas, so I've chosen not to interface it. I could put a bit of fusible fleece in here just to make it a little bit softer to the touch, or I could just do what I've done and leave it, or put in some heavyweight fusible interfacing to give it some extra strength. But I think the canvas is going to be fine on its own, so I haven't done that. Okay, so that's the shoulder straps done. I can set them to one side now. So now we start putting the outer panels together. This is the main piece. I get my bottom panel and I match the bottom raw edge of the main panel with the top raw edge of the bottom panel. And I'm going to secure it in place, and then I'm going to stitch with a 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch seam allowance across the bottom. So having stitched it on, it's probably easier to show you on the back. What I need to do now is open it, make sure that the main panel is under the base piece. So let me just do that and show you. So that seam allowance needs to be under the bottom panel, not the main panel. Like that. And then I'm going to top stitch along to secure this seam allowance to the bottom panel piece. Okay, so having done the top stitching, I'm going to fold this in half, match those raw edges, really trying to keep that seam allowance or keep those seams even. Quick pinch, very small snip. Okay, you can see. And then I can lay that on a line on my counter. And then I'm going to get one of my carry straps. Now, because these are webbing, I'm just going to seal them. Okay, so the strap has cooled down now. I can touch it, that's fine. So I'm going to find my halfway line. Let me zoom in on this. I'm going to find my halfway line, measure across, and put my shoulder strap on. Sorry, my carry strap on. Just a little bit of an overhang, half a centimetre or so. And then I do the same on the other side. Again, slightly sticking out. Now the other thing you want to do, make sure that strap is straight so that when it's flipped up, it's going to be usable and there's no twist in it. So we're just going to stitch to secure that in place. Now I really do emphasize that you must stitch this because the next step has a lot of things happening, and if these straps are not stitched on, everything moves too much. Match the raw edges, clip that on. Okay, and again, I'm going to stitch across with a seam allowance of about 1 centimetre. So you can see the stitching has kept that basting inside it, and the top panel is on. So what I want to do now is I want to flip that up, and again I want that seam allowance, that seam I've just stitched, I want it to come down. I want it to sit on top of the main panel. Show you from the front. So now I'm going to top stitch across here. Straight stitch, seam allowance of about 0.5 centimetre. Don't go more than that because you only stitched a 1 centimetre seam. So I've top stitched along. You can see on the reverse that the second row of stitching, that top stitching here, has come over. So I've secured those straps again. Now what we're going to do is get the other piece of interfacing, one of those 2 pieces that you've got left over. You're going to put it on and you're going to press. Okay, so I have fused the interfacing onto the back panel. I've used a white interfacing so you can still see the stitching and everything on there. What I'm going to do now is repeat the process. Here is a tip for you. I need to add my shoulder strap. In order to make sure that they line up, what I do is I actually lay them on top of each other, match those edges, and yep, my strap is straight. So I actually lay the straps on top of each other like this because it's really important that they line up, obviously. So because things can move after they've been secured and through sewing, I actually don't measure the second strap. I line it up. Okay, so I now have 2 pieces of outer. What we need to do is stitch them together. So right sides together, match the seams. So I'm just going to try and match the top of the main panel to the top of the main panel. Secure that. And then the top of the bottom seam to the top of the bottom seam, just match that up. I'm going to stitch these 3 sides. So I've stitched around. Now what we need to do is cut the corners of the bottom panels so that we can start to make the box corners. So I need to cut a 2-inch square or 5 centimeters square out of the bottom corners. Now to make a box corner, I've got my hand inside so that I can get those 2 seams. Get a bit of zoom here. So I've got my side seam and my base. What I want to do is get those 2 seams to line up, and then I want one to go one way and one bit of seam to go one way and one bit of seam to go the other way. The reason I want to do that is it just helps everything sit a bit better down the track. So let's repeat that on the other side. Again, seam to seam. Now on this second one, we need to make sure that this is lying in the same direction. So that base seam is lying in the same direction. Otherwise it's going to twist in the bag and just annoy you a lot. Okay, stitch across there with about 1 centimeter seam allowance. So there's the seam stitched. That bottom seam is nice and flat. So now what we can do is just turn the bag right side out. Seam is lining up. So there's the base seam, the side seam, and the horizontal seam. Let's start with the slip pocket. I've got my outer and my lining. Both of them have been interfaced because I want this to be quite a strong pocket because it's quite long. I'm going to stitch round. I'm going to leave a gap of about 4 inches or 10 centimeters on the bottom here. So I've left my opening. Just trim that thread. Trim the corners. Just cut off a pyramid, a triangle, but you don't want to cut the thread. Yeah, I'm pretty close there, but I haven't cut it. Now one of the most important tools when you're turning out a pocket is an old spare chopstick. You can, of course, use an old cocktail stick as well, a swizzle stick. But I'm a chopstick fan. So I've pushed those corners out with my finger, but you can see I'm still not getting particularly square corners. So chopstick. And see, it's just squared that corner up completely already. This one I'll do from the other side. Smooth it down. Now I'm just going to stitch across the top there, 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. So I've top stitched on my pocket. What I need to do now is get my one of my lining pieces, just fold it in half and give it a bit of a pinch on that middle. Line that up. Get my pocket, fold that in half as well, and lay it on. Now it needs to sit 5 inches or 15 centimeters down. Oh, it's almost like I've done this before. That's very close. Okay. Now I'll just grab some pins. I'm going to pin this in position, and then stitch that third side. So actually in the end I decided to do more of a 1/3, 2/3 split, but I also didn't tidy up my threads. I also backstitched at the start and the end of the stitching, and here particularly on that pocket divide. Okay. Now we turn to the ribbon and the clasp. So we're just going to put the ribbon through the loop at the top of the clasp, fold it over so that there's no raw edge. That will sit like that. So let's find that center line so that we can mark the position. So this is 7 centimeters, so about almost 3 inches from that center line. So it's going to be about there. Now because it's a ribbon, I'm not going to bother pinning it. I'm going to do that. So now what I'll do is I'll just quickly stitch a little box if I can, or at least an X here, and I'll do a straight stitch with a 1/2 centimeter seam at the top there. One quick tip before you sew the ribbon on, just make sure the pocket's the right way up, particularly if it's a fabric like this where it could go either way. Just make sure that the pocket opening is at the top. So now we're going to add the zippered pocket to the other lining piece. So I've got my second lining piece, I've got my pocket lining which I've interfaced, and my zipper. What we do first is we get the lining piece and we're going to match those edges, fold it a little bit in that middle, lay it on the surface. Then I'm going to do the same thing with my pocket. Match those edges, pinch at the top there, and then I match those 2 folds up. Now this needs to be 13 centimeters or just over about 5 1/8 of an inch down. Now what we need to do is draw the window that we're going to stitch around to then fit the zip into. So coming down. So what I want to do is I want to mark about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters down on that center fold. My fabric is 8 inches wide, or what's that, that's 20 centimeters I think. I'm going to just have a 7-inch zip, So I need to draw a line that is 7 inches long. We want to make this box window. Now I'm using a number 3 zipper, a dress zip, which means my gap is 1 centimeter. Okay. What we're going to do is you make your box halfway along your box. You will have a line. Then about 1 centimeter in, or 3/8 of an inch in, you draw a triangle. To that halfway line. What we're going to do now, I'm going to put my pins back and stitch around that square. So my zipper foot is down. My needle is locked in the down position as well, because I'll need that when I get to corners. Standard stitch length, back stitch, and just come along nice and carefully. We don't need to rush. But you can see I'm stitching on that line. So I'm going to slow down, lift the foot, turn, come down. I'll just move that pin because it's going to get in the way of the foot. Turn and come back. Turn, pull that out, foot down, back stitch, okay, and that's made the box around the outside. So I've stitched around that now. What I need to do is cut the box. Now what I do is I get that fold and I make sure that everything lines up as though I'm folding the lining in half again. Get my scissors and make a small snip. So there's a tiny hole there. Now what I'm going to do, sorry I'm moving it a lot, I apologise. Get my scissors in there and I go down to that pyramid at the end. With the pyramid, I want to cut up to that stitching, but I don't want to cut through it. So I'm just going to stop short here and go the other way. The other side of the pyramid, and then I repeat that on the other end of the zip. And now the pocket goes through the hole. Take your time doing this because you want this to be as flat as you can. What can happen is these corners scrunch like this. Okay, So that can mean the corner isn't completely square. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cut that little pyramid off very carefully. So I've cut that pyramid off, and that just reduces the bulk in the corner and helps that sit better. Okay, I've ironed this pocket on both sides. I'm going to be fiddling with this because that pink is not what I want. What I'm going to do now is I get my zip. Now I don't pin it more than that, because then you start fighting with the pins when you're sewing and it moves and it's... So I've just pinned it on the ends. I'll turn it over so you can see. Okay, so there's our box round. What I'm going to do now is just take the bottom of that pocket up to the top. Match those top seams. I'm going to pin it this way around because this is actually how we're going to stitch it. I'm going to sew it here, and I will turn with the needle down, come down here, needle stays down, I turn and I come down to here. And so there I've stitched around it, back stitched at the beginning and end of my sewing. Sorry, clunky scissors there. Now I'm going to trim those bits of zipper off. And my pocket is done. Now what we're going to do is install the magnetic snap. So you should have 4 pieces, discs on the back, a male part and a female part. Okay. Now what we've got to do is fit those. So I'm going to start with this one that is in front of me. I've got my halfway fold. Measure 1.5 inches down, or 3 centimeters down on that center line. Then what I do is I get my disc and I put it over the dot that I've drawn on the fold, which is the measurement down, and I sit it. So I'm trying to get that dot in the center of the circle on the back of the silver disc. Make a line. And then what I'm going to do is carefully put a hole in there. So you can see I've got some rips in the fabric. What I do is I get one of the pieces and I'm going to put that through those holes, and there are the prongs. It's got a couple of pieces of fusible interfacing. I'm going to force that onto the prongs. Put the disc on. Now I push these pins out sideways. I know some people bring them in onto the silver disc. I haven't heard a strong argument one way or the other being better. But that has fitted one of my pins. What I'm going to do now is put the other one on. But first, what I do, I check we're the right way up, and I'm just going to pin the lining together. Now the reason I've done that is because what I want to do is I've turned it over and I've got my male magnetic snap there. Now when I put my hand down, I can actually feel where that prong is sticking out. So what I'm going to do is I colour it in. And what this means is I know that this part is going to be able to sit exactly over that. So exactly the same process as before. I get my disc, I put it on, get my pen, and I mark the lines on either side. Get my unpicker, and I rip exactly the length of the line that I've drawn. I get my snap, I push it through those holes. I can hear it sitting there already. Get my piece of interfacing, put that down, flatten the prongs. Now the reason I've got these two extra bits of interfacing is I'm just going to put those over the top. I'm just going to literally iron them on. If I've got a piece of fusible fleece or a remnant of fabric, in fact something like that, I could put that on underneath. It's just an extra little bit of protection so that this doesn't rub that outer fabric too much. So I've ironed that on, so there's just a little piece of fabric over the bulk of the metal, then with fusible interfacing on both sides. What I need to do is stitch around this whole thing, just like I did on the outer. So I've stitched round, but I have also left my opening on the side here. What we do now is we're cutting those corners out again. Okay, and then box corners. So let's just put my hand in here to pop this out. Right, get that bottom seam and this side seam, match them up. These wings from the seams need to lay in opposite directions. And then to the other side, if I can get my hand in there, there we go. Now remember, this bottom seam needs to lay in the same direction. Just make sure that that's there. These two seams are lined up. We're going to go across. So there's the box corner. Now I have back stitched over this seam just because it's going to get a lot of movement, and I back stitched at the start and end of my sewing on both corners as well. That is the lining done. What we need to do now is take our strap anchors and attach them to the outer. So first thing to do is to turn the outer sideways. What we need to do is measure down from the top here. So 4 inches or 10 centimeters from the top of the bag. I'm going to draw a line. So I've turned the bag right side in. I've got both of my strap anchors. I can still see the line that I marked. So what I need to do is I fold the metalwork out of the way, aim for halfway, and I have lined up the top of that fold with that line. Move over a little bit, slightly lengthen my stitch, I'm going to come up to that basting line I did when I made them. Now I don't try and turn this round. I put it down, and by sight I line up the needle with that back corner. I'm holding the foot down in reverse. Now I will turn so that I can come back along the bottom. Turn. And then I'm going to come up to this corner. Down. Along. Up. And across. The other thing it's really helpful to do is make sure that that internal seam is laying flat, so when you stitch this on, it actually catches that seam and helps keep it flat on the side of your bag as well. Doing the second side in exactly the same way can be a little bit more difficult because you've now got the weight from the other one, from the first strap anchor. So just take it slowly and evenly. So there they are, strap anchors attached. What I need to do now is get my lining, and then I want to put the outer inside the lining, right sides together. Let's push the handles down. Match the seams because that just helps keep everything square. Now I am going to I'm going to pin the seams, because out of anything, this is one area I do not want to move. And then again, I'm just checking that I'm making the top of the seam lie in the same direction as the bottom. Try and catch that seam. There we go. push that carry handle down and out of the way. Now the way I can make this sit a bit better is if I pull that out and these two seams here meet, that's going to give me my halfway points, which is another great spot to just chuck a couple of pins to stop it from moving around. Okay, now what we need to do is stitch around the top with a centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've stitched that top seam allowance all the way around. Through the side seam, I carefully pull the outer. Just take your time with this one because you don't want to rip any stitches or seams. You now need to put that lining into the bag, and then what we want to do is go round and just secure that top. Now I want to do this before I close that seam because I want to make sure everything's fitting and working nicely. Taking the gap and just pinching it like that. Let me zoom in for you. So I've just folded it over. Couple of pins. I'm going to come down with about a 1/2 centimetre seam, about 1/8 of an inch. I don't really want much more than that. I think it will thread behind. Most important thing to do here is make sure that your shoulders, your carry straps are down, away from the top of the bag. We're going to go over the ribbon again. That's fine. Just another gentle bit of reinforcement. Okay. What I need to do now is fit and install the webbing for the adjustable shoulder strap. Okay, I've apologized for the long zoom, but this is going to be fiddly and you need to see the whole bag. So first thing to do is to get the buckle. Make sure that it is the right side up, so the bar is there and not underneath. Feed it through, and then on the other side of the bar, pull through about 7 centimeters or so. Fold it over, and fix that like that. Now, keeping that in that position and my strap the same way, I go to the side here and I pull it through, just checking that it's all going in the same direction. I then come back to the buckle, over the buckle, through the buckle. Having fed it through the buckle, I just need to make sure that that's straight. Then I go to the other side and from the outside come in, fold over about an inch, a couple of centimeters, and secure that. Now we're going to stitch a boxed X basically in the two places that these clips are sitting. But before we do that, we need to make sure that the adjustable shoulder strap is adjustable, because if it's not, we've got to fix it. So, yep, that is adjusting for me. Now I can go and stitch. So you can see I have stitched a box with an X in it on that first clip, and then I've done the same thing on that other end, which means now my tote is finished. So I've got my adjustable shoulder strap, I have my carry handle, bag closes with a magnetic snap, I've got a slip pocket, and I've got a zippered pocket. And we're done. Here's my bag. I would love to see yours. Send me photos, or if you put them up on social media, please use the hashtag #2handmade4me or hashtag tripping tote bag. I'd love to see what you've made. Please don't forget to like the video and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more sewing videos. Thanks so much for sewing with me today. I really enjoyed it.